Hello, hello. Welcome. I am Sivan Purdue of Purdue Art Therapy, and I am an art therapist and a creative life engagement consultant. And today on our little tea and chats, we are going to talk about what is the difference between early onset and late onset Alzheimer's. Now, there's different types of dementia, obviously, as we've mentioned before. Today, we're really just going to talk about Alzheimer's. If you're interested in learning about Parkinson's or other types of dementia, put it in the comments, let me know, and I will be more than happy to go over it with you. Anything dealing with art therapy, dementia, therapy in general. If you're curious about it, let me know and we'll chat about it. So, oftentimes, dementia is associated with older adults, right? We think of people in their 80s getting diagnosed with dementia. That's not always the case, though. So there is something called early onset or young onset dementia, where someone under the age of 65 is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. We're just going to say Alzheimer's for today, right? But it can be any type of dementia. That is the main indicator. So if you were diagnosed before the age of 65 with Alzheimer's disease, you have early or young onset. If you were diagnosed after the age of 65, you have traditional late onset Alzheimer's. That's the main difference. The other confusing piece is oftentimes we hear stages, right? Alzheimer's has stages, early, middle, late stages. There's even numbered. We can go over that at some point if that's something you're interested. And again, if you have any comments or thoughts, please put it in the chat. I am happy to address it. I love knowing that you're here, so give me a shout out. I appreciate it. But there's a difference, right? Early onset Alzheimer's does not mean early stage of Alzheimer's or dementia, okay? You can be 57, diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. Oh, hey, Chris, thanks for coming. Good to see ya. But you can be 80. I'm sorry, I got all confused because I said hi to Chris. You can have diagnosed at 57 with early onset, but be in the late stages of Alzheimer's. Or you can be 80, diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and be in the early stages and being just diagnosed. So that's a difference there. A lot of the times, because people hear early, they confuse the two. But it's important to know that early onset does not necessarily mean early stage, okay? It really depends on your disease progression and when you were diagnosed. Some of the things I wanted to go over, so I'm looking down at my notes to make sure I have everything here with me, is there's two different types of early onset, right? There's kind of the common Alzheimer's disease, which has the traditional progression. And then there's the genetic Alzheimer's disease, which if you have a genetic component, if you have a long family history, which we often see of Alzheimer's disease, you are more likely to get early onset, if that's what you've been diagnosed in your family. Let me make that clear. If you have people who are diagnosed in their 80s, that's not indicating that you will necessarily get early onset. They don't know what causes early onset or young onset dementia or Alzheimer's disease, but there is a familial link there, right? It's rarer to have the genetic form of it with that close family history of it. But those folks usually start showing symptoms even earlier into their 30s and 40s. So this is something that surprisingly can impact someone in their 30s. And oftentimes, even with traditional Alzheimer's disease, symptoms don't start showing up till 15 years after there have been changes in the brain. So it sits there and it's making changes and doing stuff. And as we're younger, we can usually accommodate, right? We compensate for things going on. But with this disease, compensation isn't enough with it, right? So again, we don't know what causes it. I'll kind of go over at the end a little info sheet of kind of the main points to remember, which I think are important. Let's see, make sure I talked about everything. With that, those are kind of the main things. The important thing to know and to remember with it, right, is young onset is before the age of 65. Anything over is traditional or late onset Alzheimer's. And there's unique challenges that come with young onset Alzheimer's, right? So if you can even imagine being diagnosed with something like that in your 40s, it's a huge life change, you know, anytime you have that diagnosis, but especially so young, right? First off, it's a really tough diagnostic process, right? Especially when you're so young. It can take years for people to land on the correct diagnosis. Oftentimes having frustrations with their medical providers who don't believe them, or write it off as normal aging, or contribute it to other things. Now, there are more factors or more things that can create dementia symptoms, right? Before we had talked about the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia. There are more factors that can create dementia symptoms in someone who's younger. But if we're talking about early onset Alzheimer's, that's a tough one, right? That takes a long time to be diagnosed. And so there's a battery of tests that you have to do, and specialists, and we can go over, if you all let me know that's something you're interested in, how do you even get diagnosed, right? If you suspect that you might have Alzheimer's or dementia, where do you even go? That's hard, right? Who do you talk to first? How do you get the ball rolling, especially when you feel like you're kind of being written off by your primary care doctor? You're also, it's difficult to find services. So unfortunately, a lot of our services and resources are geared towards older adults because that's the bigger population, right? So you have day programs and enrichment things and senior livings, right? So even if you have young onset and you might be interested in some of the programming, you might be disqualified because you're too young, which feels bananas a little bit, right? So it's tougher to find resources, which is really difficult. I encourage you to reach out to your local Alzheimer's Association chapter because they often have, and I know they are trying to gear more towards the young onset folks to see what kind of resources they have so that you can connect with other people who also have young onset, which is so, so important for you to create that community and that support system around you with that. And it's tough to balance life, right? That is a whole other thing to try and deal with if you're 45 and you're raising kids and you get this diagnosis. Where do you even begin? What do you do? It is so important. Again, your local Alzheimer's Association chapters, local dementia resources will have some resources for you with how to cope with those day-to-day things. I'm biased, but I also encourage you to get a therapist, right? These are the types of things we don't know how to deal with them until they happen, right? This is not part of the manual that we're given. Number one, it's a huge blow to get diagnosed with that. And then how do you continue on and go through life with these changed circumstances, trying to raise kids and continue to have a relationship with your partner? All these things are so tough. So I absolutely encourage you to seek support. And actually, next week on Tuesday, we're going to talk about the difference between going to therapy and venting to a friend, right? A lot of folks will be like, oh, I don't need a therapist. I just talk to my friends. I vent to them about it, right? No, there's a difference in it. There's a difference of supports. It's important to know that difference. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that because I'm finding that question coming up is, what's the difference between it? How do I know when I might need to go see a therapist? So that you can judge for yourself. And hopefully, you know, the more we talk about it, the less stigma there is about it to kind of dispel that, which is so, so important because it's like any other health issue that we're going through, right? So key points going back to early onset dementia. Oh, Chris got a question here. Is young onset Alzheimer's a separate diagnosis, or can it be the result of another diagnosis or progression of a previously diagnosed condition you have? Good question. It is a separate diagnosis. So if you have a previous diagnosis of something, and I'm not quite sure if you're thinking of something in particular, it would be separate. And that's part of, while you're getting those battery of tests to see what is even going on, they are going to rule out everything else. And usually Alzheimer's is the last one. So they keep narrowing it until they come to that one that your symptoms best fit in, right? With diagnosis of anything, mental health, physical things, right? There is a criteria that you have to meet in order to get that diagnosis to fit, right, the medical need for it. And so if we're trying to diagnose someone, we rule out everything else. We see what's going on. There might be different tests going on to see and help rule out everything else to narrow down as specific as possible what you're dealing with. So if they find later on that Alzheimer's is there and present, that usually just means that it was misdiagnosed earlier. And so that's what it actually was. So I hope that answers your question, Chris, about if it can progress. And that's what goes with the differential diagnosis of, is this dementia symptoms showing up from something else, right? Okay, good, I'm glad that did. Or is this Alzheimer's specific dementia, right? As I think we mentioned in the depression chat that we did, there's other things that can bring up those dementia symptoms. And so we have to weed out and figure out exactly what's going on and kind of try and treat other things to narrow it down to see if it actually fits in that criteria that we're looking for, so that you then say, okay, this is what I know we're dealing with, right? We're dealing with Alzheimer's disease. Or if there's personality changes, that means it's not Alzheimer's disease. That means it's frontal lobe dementia, right? If there's a stroke history, it's probably vascular dementia. So all those different little nuanced things that will show up slightly differently and present differently will then differentiate between all of them, right? Let me take a drink of my tea here. I'm not doing Earl Grey today, actually. I am doing a cinnamon orange, which is quite delicious on this chilly day. Okay, key points I want you to remember to kind of take home and know is, although Alzheimer's disease commonly, right, it's the most common type of dementia, it commonly affects older adults, early onset Alzheimer's can affect anyone under 65, so it can affect people in their 30s or 40s, right? Oh, good. I'm glad you find this helpful, Chris. Yes, we do lump everything into one big category, right? That's why it's so important to kind of know and talk about this stuff, right? And ask questions. Absolutely. That's what's important, is ask questions and figure it out, because if you aren't in this healthcare world, how do you even know, right? This isn't intuitive stuff. This isn't stuff that we naturally kind of just pick up because we come across or is talked about. And so it's important that we talk about it as much as possible, but also ask questions and figure it out and find those resources. Early onset affects memory, thinking, and behavior. There's no known cure for it. We just kind of manage quality of life with folks with Alzheimer's disease, early onset or late onset, and kind of help slow the progression as much, but do life enrichment things. But early diagnosis can help with that quality of life and treatment piece of it. Staying healthy and having good diet and exercise can actually help with it. So they say there's a connection between the heart and brain, right? So actually being active, exercising, get that heart pumping, right? The whole vascular system going can actually help with the symptoms, to keep them at bay a little bit, and just overall health, right? So good heart health is good brain health as well. And and avoid any alcohol and other substances that may affect memory, thinking, and behavior, right? That's a big one too. There is such a thing as, you know, alcohol or drug-induced dementia, where someone basically drinks so much that it damages the brain and they end up having dementia symptoms. So that's always, you know, a good thing to keep in mind. Everything in moderation, taking care of yourself, doing what you need to do, taking care of yourself both physically and mentally as you can. I want to thank everyone who was here. I appreciate it so much. And for those of you watching the replay, let me know. Again, I'm Sivan Purdue of Purdue Art Therapy. Let me know in the comments. We're doing another series. We're going to keep this up next month on Tuesdays at 3 o'clock. As I said, we are going to start with the difference between what's therapy and what's venting to a friend, and why it's important to know the difference, and why is it important to kind of give your friends a break sometimes and have that professional there to help support you as well. Actually, I want to let you know, I've been kind of posting about it, but for those of you who see this, I am actually starting, I'm excited, in March, an early onset support group. So it's an art-based group for folks who are diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. You can email me at sivan@purduearttherapy.com, message me here at Purdue Art Therapy, reach out, go to my website and send me a message. The website is purduearttherapy.com. I would love to chat if you're interested in it, if you think someone you know might be interested, if you have any questions about the group, let me know. Again, that's starting in March. Keep an eye out for information about it. I appreciate you all. Take care, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.